Welcome to a Bram Adams Deep Dive. Today's topic is how one dude's hobby is 8 billion people's treasure. And it might surprise you as to what this dude's hobby was and how it's treasured to everyone who's alive today. Who are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about this guy, Leibniz, and his philosophy hobby. Now, forewarned, he was a career philosopher. He was a polymath. He was a man of many skills. But in this particular video, we're going to talk about how he found a particular book that changed the world of computing forever. By the end of this video, you will understand how Leibniz is directly connected to the computers that you are seeing this on today. And we're going to talk about how that connection happened. So Leibniz was born in 1646 and died in 1716, and he was a total gigachad. Yes, this man was a child prodigy. He mainly wrote through unpublished letters. He only really published 2 full books in his whole career. He co-invented calculus, and as a matter of fact, people in the mainland continent of Europe used his calculus over Newton's because they liked the mathematical formulations better. They thought it was clearer. And once he trolled an entire alchemy society by coming up with a letter that was so engaging and so believable, even though he just pulled it out of his ass, that they just let him in and started paying him a pension. So he fooled them so hard by reading a bunch of books on alchemy and coming up with a good letter that everybody was just like, yeah, this man must be the king of alchemy. So not only was he a child prodigy, he was a full-on polymath. He invented calculus, as I just said, and was responsible for so many other fields. He created the world's first mechanical calculator, for example. But that does not mean that this man is without L's. He is not perfect. He was bald for number one. I mean, he wore huge wigs. I'm wearing a hat right now. Am I bald? I don't think I'm bald, but I am wearing a hat. So, I am afraid of balding. He was a lifelong bachelor. And, what we know what that means when it's written in your historical documents that it's of note that you're a bachelor, then it's not the good type of bachelor. It's not the George Clooney, the Patrick Swayze type bachelors. It's the other kind of bachelor. Worst part, few people came to his funeral after he passed. He had made a lot of friends in life. He wrote a lot of letters to them, but apparently emotionally he was kind of distant, and people didn't come to his funeral. That said, he was a super big optimist throughout his whole life, and he was a rational optimist, which we will be talking about later. And then 50 years after his death, Voltaire wrote in his Candide a very stunning negative review about Leibniz. He was saying, Leibniz was way too optimistic, etc., etc. And this put a really big dent in his reputation for a few hundred years after his life. But we're here for his philosophy hobby. We're not here for his mathematical beliefs. We are here for his mathematical beliefs, but we're specifically talking about his philosophy hobby first. Because what you need to understand about Leibniz is that he also loved Eastern literature and was inspired in particular by one book recommended by his friend Joachim Bouvet, the I Ching. But what is the I Ching? You see, the I Ching was written by Fu Xi in between the 10th and the 4th century BC. And we don't exactly know if Fu Xi was a real person or not. At least I don't, because when I was looking on the internet, I couldn't find a good answer for it. But for all intents and purposes, Fu Xi was a real person that wrote this. You see, in the I Ching, Fu Xi observed patterns and created the 8 trigrams. These 8 trigrams made up the entirety of reality through the binary poles of yin and yang, male and female, the dichotomous poles of nature. In fact, the I Ching speculated that all of reality is a dream built up from these fulgurations, which are lightning strikes from the binaries of yin and yang. Everything is just made up of a combination of the 64 hexagrams, and you would take this yarrow stick and you would move across the I Ching to find where your particular destiny lies. Not only is the I Ching a dope book that's thousands of years old, it inspired Naruto, and I know to the Zoomers out there that Naruto, the Hyuga clan, actually, I guess Naruto isn't even Zoomer at this point. Naruto's firmly within the millennials. I was reading Naruto when I was on the bus in middle school. So we can actually see Neji in the middle of the hexagram. It's actually a pair permutation of the trigrams that were introduced in the I Ching, with the 64 palms move that the Hyuga clan is so known for with their Byakugan. So little modern day connection to thousands of years of Chinese tradition. So let's bring this back to Leibniz. We were talking about Leibniz, and we were saying what happened after he read the I Ching. Well, after he read the I Ching, he realized that the hexagrams were an affirmation of his universal beliefs. But what were Leibniz's universal beliefs? So let's take a quick break to talk about those universal beliefs. Leibniz believed, he wrote a book called Monadology at age 70. So this is at the end of his life. He was kind of wrapping up and really wanted to sum up his philosophies in one core thesis. Basically, the core thesis of the book is that the world is made up of monads, and a monad is a simple, indivisible substance that can spawn other monads. So as we mentioned, fulgurations are these lightning strikes, and under the monadology philosophy framework, God is a perfect monad, and when a perfect monad creates other monads, this must be the most perfect universe. And I think that this is where he kind of came into disagreement with Voltaire, but he never really got a chance to defend himself against Voltaire because Voltaire was writing about Leibniz's work 50 years after the man died. So the rebirth of binary. You see, binary had actually been around since Egypt. Binary as a concept of true and false, existing and not existing, has been around for thousands of years, but it hasn't really been used in a mathematical concept until Leibniz came along. Leibniz came along and restructured binary from a verbal logic into mathematical logic and penned that on paper for the first time. He combined what he had done with calculus and Boolean logic, which we're going to talk about soon, in binary from the I Ching to create binary as we know it. At first, he didn't really have a use for binary. It was kind of just a nice little convention of a thing that he created until it fit with his philosophy, and he doubled down. And this double down allowed him to spend more time actually working on binary as a deep concept, which leads us to the future. So we need to fast forward. We don't need to fast forward maybe a decade, maybe 50 years. We're going to fast forward a few hundred years to George Boole, who lived from 1815 to 1864. A few facts about George Boole. He created formal Boolean algebra. He was self-taught. He knew multiple languages. As a matter of fact, he taught himself those languages. And he created his own school to support his family at 19 years old. The man was super smart. And from what we're talking about the Boolean logic of true and false logic comparisons of ORs and XORs and ANDs. Those are the things that we're paying attention to. And the algebra that he created used those as the ones and zeros. A little thing about George Boole, he was inspired by Leibniz. His wife actually wrote about her husband. Having been informed of Leibniz's anticipations of his own logic, felt as if Leibniz had come and shaken hands with him across the centuries. Now, this is a pretty big deal. George Boole was a really smart dude, and he came up with a mathematical principle and formalized mathematical principle that changed the shape of algebra. So for him to kind of come out and say that, oh my God, Leibniz has actually created this first, and it feels as if I've kind of came to the same logical conclusion as one of Europe's foremost mathematicians and geniuses, definitely sat well with George Boole. But we're not done fast forwarding. We actually need to fast forward one more time, another 100-some odd years, until we reach the final player in our play, Claude Shannon. Claude Shannon wrote a really, really, really important college paper. You see, in 1930-32, right around the time before World War II, he was introduced by another student to the work of Boole in college, and he was really impressed by how everything could be kind of formalized as zeros and ones, and that zeros and ones could be converted back into decimal numbers, and decimal numbers could be converted back into binary. 4 years later, he was doing an internship or working as an assistant for Vannevar Bush, working on the differential analyzer. The differential analyzer was a machine that integrated numbers over a distance and took those numbers and made claims about them, similar to kind of like the idea of if this happens, then this happens. You see, what Claude Shannon figured out was really important. He realized that the electrical applications of Boolean algebra could construct any logical numerical relationship. This means that you can create gates using electricity that functionally work similar to Boolean logic. This is a big deal. In other words, on-off electrical switches could mean any number or any logical statement. And that's basically the fundamental concept of computing. Every single computer that's being used ever is based off of this idea. It's based off of the core idea that you can take a logical statement and use electricity to convert the computer into a state in which it can do computation. But he's not done. After changing the world of computing with this paper, he also changed the world of information communication with our friend binary. He represented a binary digit as a unit of uncertainty, a unit of noise in a signal of communication from when someone just says, "Will you marry me? Yes or no?" But then they also leave another essay behind it of stipulations. That's all data points. Those are all ones and zeros that needed to be added to the yes and no, which would have been the 1 and the 0. This allowed him to realize that every message can be turned into a most efficient format through code, but not just any code. It's sometimes repetition code, but more importantly, up to a speed limit of C. There's a lot of things that I'm kind of hand-waving for the purpose of this video, but I'll leave sources in the video description. Not just any code, though. Binary. What we see that today with is error correcting with CDs, the Voyager spacecraft, retrieving data quality out of the noise and finding the signal that matters to connect people together so that messages don't need to be repeated and messages don't get lost over massive distances with the Voyager spacecraft, for example, hundreds of thousands of millions of miles in the vacuum of space. So that leaves us with the lineage being complete. We have our grand big Leibniz, Gottfried Leibniz. We have our big George Boole, and we have our little Claude Shannon. All three of them mathematical greats, inspired, very stair-step by one another's work. So in sum, we have Fu Xi, who wrote the I Ching thousands of years ago, saying that reality was entirely made up by these fulgurations of yin and yang, and that all of reality is held within the 64 hexagrams of ones and zeros and turning on things on and off, the only state of existing or not existing. Thousands of years later, Leibniz read the I Ching after inventing calculus and converted binary from a religious philosophical concept into a mathematical one that was more formalized. Hundreds of years after him, Boole found his work and used binary to formulate a brand new branch of mathematics called Boolean algebra, used by discrete mathematics students in computer science introductory classes the world across. And 100 years after that, Claude Shannon and other computational people in his era of the early World War II era, the von Neumanns, the JCR Licklighters, changed computers forever. They changed computation forever by realizing that Boolean logic can be turned into real-life electrical signals, which can make for an extremely fast, extremely reliable form of communication across wires, across the internet, across space, and that this communication can be written down in ways that people can access it for hundreds or thousands of years to come. But where do we stand 100 years after these giants? We've stood on the shoulder of giants. We've learned how binary has moved through thousands of years, all the way from Egypt and Fu Xi and the I Ching into Leibniz's hands, into Boole's hands, into our hands today. So what is the giant of our era? What did we gain from all of this computing? I think that we gained something actually pretty powerful ourselves. We gained funny TikTok videos.
This filter does not mean anything. It's just a random number going like this and it just stops at a random time. It's got nothing to do with it scanning. Sometimes though, technology is advanced to the point where it can scan your face and is able to provide accurate results.
So ladies and gentlemen, that's my piece. We learned about Leibniz. We learned about the connection to binary. We learned about how ones and zeros power the world of computers, and if we believe in the I Ching's statements, the world itself. So this video is sponsored by me. I built this technology called stenography. If you're a programmer, please feel free to check it out. It uses AI to document code in real time. It parses code blocks and then automatically turns them into English kind of documentation over functions, and it splits up functions into smaller, more sustainable chunks and everything like that. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something, and make sure to subscribe and come check us out at twitch.tv/Bramsies, where this whole thing was made live, and the next ones will be made live as well. And thanks for watching. Have a good one.